All right. Here goes nothing. I haven't really talked about my self-love journey because I was in the process of it for the last year. So, and I was asked yesterday, I had created okay, my next step from self-love is self-discipline. And I explained how I'm waking up at 5 in the morning and stuff and using a calendar. And I showed that off a little bit. But then I got a lot of messages after being like, okay, but what was your self-love journey all about? And what did you do because people need help with that, right? And I was like, okay, I guess I'm doing a Facebook Live about it. So first thing I want to say is what I went through, right? So what I went through, I've gone through a bunch of toxic past relationships, and so has my family for that matter. It seems to be going down the line, right? That's a story that was in my head by that time period. So I was like, this is just my life, right? I was in a very toxic relationship where after just 6 months of being with that person, he cheated on me, and I found out a couple weeks later, and it was a disaster. And I stayed with him because I was like, listen, I know when it's fight or flight, I'm a fight girl. I try to run away. And I thought that was one of my main problems in my past relationships. So I was like, let me handle this now. Yeah, that didn't work out for me, right? And, I make mistakes. It's possible. It happens. So I ended up staying with the guy that cheated on me for longer time periods, for a good year afterwards, going back and forth, leaving, coming back, leaving, coming back. And I was crying every night. It was horrendous, guys. Like every day I would try to be my optimistic self, and I would notice I was a different person and I wasn't being the best version of myself. So one day it was like a light bulb just hit. Ding! Jasmine, what the panda are you doing in this relationship? You need to get out, right? And I was like, what do you mean? How am I supposed to get out? It was a whole process of, I didn't know how to be alone, and I'd rather deal with someone's shit than be alone. So, and I know a lot of people go through this at the same time, which is why I'm sharing this. And this is like, I'm being very vulnerable right now, guys. Like, I'm freaking out a little bit, okay? So, at some point I was like, okay, Jasmine, I know this isn't a good relationship for me. Like, screw it. If I'm alone for the rest of my life, I'm alone for the rest of my life. But I'm 22, so that, like, hopefully that doesn't happen, right? And I had lost my first love of my life through a car crash. So I was like, listen, if I can get over that, I can get over this, right? So I left the cheating person and I started my self-love journey. And the first thing I did was cry a lot and watch Gilmore Girls for the first couple days and just be like, yes, girl, I get it, right? And then I was like, okay, it's time to get my shit together, right? I'm a personal development person. I'm a coach. If I can't do it, no one can. Like, that was my attitude. So I'm a reader. So the first thing I did was I got a book by accident, by the way, called Conscious Uncoupling. It's 5 steps to living happily even after. So it's even if you get out of a divorce, if someone dies, if whatever it is, this book helps me throughout that process. So highly recommended. It talks about boundaries. It talks about the self-love journey. It talks about how to move on correctly, right? And just to be okay by yourself. And then the second book I got after that one is Facing Love Addiction by Pia Mellody. No idea if I said that right. I think I did, though. So Facing Love Addiction, and there's also Facing Codependency, but she explains the difference between the two and how to get over that. And instead of being in love with somebody else, be in love with yourself and be in love with life in general, right? So I'm a journaler as well, so I started to work on gratitude and being grateful for my life and what I had at that day, because I was crying so much. I was like, what am I going to do, right? So I focused on being grateful throughout the day and being grateful with myself. So I started I am statements. I started mantras. I'm courageous. I'm lovable. I am fantastic. I'm smart, right? And I started just giving myself all this love, right? Another thing I did was I got really close to my family. My family and I would fight with my mom for over 8 years before this time period, and she was in a toxic relationship too. And me moving on allowed her to move on as well. So her and I were on this self-love journey together. It was fantastic, right? I would still do it alone. I rarely ever spent a day alone back then. So I started once a week, I started just being alone, turning off my phone completely. Like, for the day, people would be like, Jasmine, where are you? And I'm like, listen, I'm on a self-love journey. This is something I got to do, right? So it doesn't mean you have to turn off your phone for a day, but it was something that, I did, and it was fantastic for me, that helped me throughout the process, because I focused on what I loved to do. And that was huge for me. I focused on doing what I love. So I started to read more. I started to watch Netflix here and there. I started to serve others. I volunteered like crazy. I became an assistant for Landmark. I'm now an assistant for Jennifer Grace and CI Journey, right? So those are things that I started to do. My friends were huge as well. Not only was I in a toxic relationship with my boyfriend at that time period, but I was in a toxic relationship with my friends. I was a people pleaser. I was practically a doormat that people would be like, well, I need a ride. I'm going to bother Jaslyn, even though I know she has a huge test tomorrow, kind of thing, or a huge course to take care of, or a workshop to do tomorrow. I'm just going to ask her to pick me up an hour away and drop me off at my house, and then she can go home at 1 a.m. in the morning. It was big, guys. I was this doormat for everybody in my life, and not just for that relationship. So I started to notice a pattern, and I was like, listen, I got out of that relationship. I'm going to get out of every other relationship that's bad for me. So I started to let go of friends hardcore, and that made me extra lonely, right? And then I started being like, okay, what makes someone lonely? Well, if I'm not okay with being alone with myself, how can I expect someone else to want to be with me, right? So I started to think, okay, well, who would I want to be with for the rest of my life anyway, right? Well, first off, I'm stuck with myself, right? Stuck with myself. So why not love myself, right? If I know that for the rest of my life, I'm going to be sleeping next to me, let's focus on that first. And then I can focus on the person that's going to sleep next to me, like literally, right? So I started to really focus on what did I love to do, my friendship with other people, my family, reading. I started painting. I started rock climbing. I did a bunch of different hobbies, and I love traveling as well, right? So one thing I did was I never went traveling by myself, like ever, right? Not even at the airport. I would always find someone to go with or cancel the trip. So one thing I did was I started going on traveling by myself. I went to San Diego by myself. I'm going to Sedona, Arizona for my birthday, right? And on my birthday, I would even just, I hung out with myself that day. It's my birthday, right? Let me celebrate myself, right? For Valentine's Day, I took myself out. I've been going to movies by myself. And trust me, guys, again, this was a year process. This wasn't something that I did very quickly, right? Another thing I did was I love to journal, right? I already said that earlier. One thing I did was I imagined this, I don't have an aunt, right? But I imagined this aunt that really loved me, and I wrote a letter to myself as if I was that aunt, right? And I started saying amazing things about myself and my strengths, my qualities, my values, and I started focusing on that. And I read that letter almost at least once a week most of the time. I haven't read it in the last 2 weeks, I believe, but I read it 2 weeks ago, and that really helps me to be like, look, these are my strengths. This is what I need to focus on. Why am I focusing on this weaknesses or my mistakes? I'm human. It's going to happen, right? Let me think. Another thing I did was I organized my life. When you're depressed or sad or about to get over someone, you're going to notice that your life is very messy in general. You don't want to do the dishes. You don't want to eat correctly. Your room is a mess. Your car is a mess, right? You have tissues everywhere. So one thing I did was I organized my entire life. Like literally my closet, I took everything out. My room was even extra messier. And then I started one by one throwing out things that would remind me of him or anybody else that I was in a toxic relationship with. And I literally got everything out of my room and just made my room about me, right? After that, I started to align my life with the universe because I wanted to love myself, but I wanted to love the universe as well, right? So I created a universe list where I knew the difference between intentions versus expectations, right? So I let go of the how and the by when I was going to meet someone, or by when I was going to start making the specific amount of money, or by when I'd have this amount of clients. And I started focusing on just living my life like I am that best version of myself, right? Like I already had all of that, and I was living this incredible life in my head, and slowly but surely it started manifesting in my life, right? So I focused on, one thing I did was I was like, okay, who's the person that I would want to be with, right? Someone that wouldn't cheat on me, someone that was very loyal, someone that was honest, right? And I started to focus on my own integrity and my own authenticity, knowing that I wanted that person to have that as well. So I was like, okay, for me to have this person, I need to be this person as well, right? And that list is what I started to focus on, who I needed to be to attract so-and-so person in my life. And now I'm starting to attract people that I would have never thought was possible, right? And not only as a boyfriend or a girlfriend for that matter, but as friendships as well. I have met Heather Ashamara, Dan Millman, Bill Cartwright, like completely by accident. You know what I mean? And it's been amazing. And I met Jennifer Grace by accident as well. So I'm meeting these high energy level people now in my life and just bumping into them, and they're understanding that I have high energy too. It's been a blessing, guys, right? So as soon as I started to work on myself, I started noticing that the world was aligning with me as well. So these are some tools and tricks. Let me see if I wanted to add anything else, because I wrote down like a list over here, right? Focusing on my strengths, I mentioned. Oh, limiting versus empowering beliefs, right? So I started realizing that we all have agreements that we have made with ourselves, or belief systems that we have created because of our past. And I started to go deep into those and try to figure out, okay, that's a story. That's not exactly what happened, right? So for example, my mom had told me that the family is cursed, and that all men are a problem in our lives, and it's a consistent thing throughout our ancestry. So I was like, man, this isn't even a problem with myself. This is a problem with my family. I'm screwed, right? So I started to focus on that story and being like, okay, it's time to destroy it, right? So I started realizing, okay, well, my father is still around. He's the only man that's still around. And then I started focusing on friendships that I could get along with. Guys, it was amazing, the process you can go through while breaking a story, right? That was another thing I did. I learned to cultivate my intuition, right? So a lot of the times in these Facebook Lives, you're going to hear me mention 3 things: meditation, mindfulness, and journaling. I already mentioned journaling, right? For meditation, I started to really get into myself spiritually, not religious. I'm not a very religious person, but I got in tune with the universe and in tune with myself, so I could understand myself better, right? So for example, in that last relationship that I had mentioned, that he cheated on me, and it was a very, very toxic relationship to the point that I cried every night. In the very beginning, I remember this little gut feeling like this isn't gonna last, right? And I remember pushing it away like I want it to last. At that time period, the relationship was perfect beyond compare, right? It was the best relationship I had had at that moment, until I learned that he cheated on me, right? So at that time period, I had forgotten about my intuition. I had literally pushed my intuition away and caged it because I didn't want to listen to it, right? So what I've learned to do now is I learned to cultivate my intuition, and I have an intuition list where if my intuition tells me something, I'll write it down. And when I look at my list again, maybe even 6 months later, I was like, that happened, right? So I learned to cultivate my intuition through meditation, mindfulness, and journaling. And if y'all need help with that, please let me know, and I have no problem doing more Facebook Lives about it. I think that's the basis point. Personal development in general was a huge focus for me. Liz Brown, Darren Hardy, Jim Rohn, meeting people like Jennifer Grace, Heather Ashamara, Bill Cartwright. So I think those were the big ones. TD Jakes was another one. Gabriel Bernstein, right? So if y'all need help finding people that can motivate you, Gary Vee. So find someone that motivates you, find a role model to follow that's in this self-love journey, and create a brand new you, right? You were this person beforehand, and just, I particularly didn't date anyone for that entire year. Like, I didn't care to. No one attracted me, because I wanted to attract someone in personally that was above who I was at that time period. Now I finally feel like I am that person that can attract that person that I wanted in my life, right? So now I'm putting myself out there, but it took a year, guys, for me to be like, it's time. So do it whenever you're ready. And if you guys want, I'll go into more tools, and particularly like what did I write in my gratitude journaling, and I'll give you guys examples and things like that if you guys want me to. So please message me. Whatever messages I get, I use those to make more Facebook Lives and figure out what I should talk about next. So I love you all. Do your thing, and I'll talk to you soon. Mwah, mwah, mwah.